Last week, oxidation and reduction got the highest vote for this week's weekly topic. 56% of you voted for oxidation and reduction, and 44% of you voted for chemical equilibrium. So it is very important to familiarize with the charges on atoms. Another rule to apply in oxidation and reduction is the overall charges. As mentioned before, the overall charges on atoms must equal to 0 or the charge on the polyatomic ion itself. So the basic rules of oxidation and reduction is to become familiar with the polyatomic ions, and you need to know their charges. For example, the sulfate ion. So take a look at the table and look for the phosphate ion. So the phosphate ion has a -3 charge overall. This means that the oxidation number is the same as its charge. The overall charge on the polyatomic ion phosphate should have a -3 charge. What is the oxidation number of sulfur in part 1, sulfur dioxide, SO2, and part 2, the sulfate ion, SO4 2-. The first step is to identify the charge on the oxygen atom, which is -2, as we know because we looked at the periodic table and the charges that each atom has depending on the group it's in. There are 2 oxygen atoms in sulfur dioxide. So there are 2 oxygen atoms, so the -2 charge is going to occur twice, if that makes sense, to give you a -4 charge. So the overall charge of oxygen in sulfur dioxide is -4, and the oxidation number is the same as its charge. So the oxidation number of oxygen in this case is -4. The second step is to note that the overall charge on sulfur dioxide should equal to 0, as we mentioned before. So a -4 plus a +4 should give you an answer of 0. So therefore, the charge on sulfur is +4. So we're going to move on to the much more difficult one, which is the polyatomic ion we have here, which is sulfate ion, the sulfate ion. So the same rule is applied here also. So the first step is to determine the oxidation number of the oxygen atom, which we know is -2. And don't be afraid to observe the question, don't be afraid to actually note your observations. If you follow the right step, you should get the answer correct. So the overall charge on the oxygen atom is -8 because that -2 occurs 4 times in the sulfate ion. So therefore the overall charge on the oxygen atom is -8. So remember that there are 4 oxygen atoms. The second step is to note that the overall charge on the sulfate ion should equal to -2. Okay, looking at the sulfate ion, it actually has an overall charge of -2. So therefore, the oxidation number of sulfur is equal to +6. So think of it this way. what number would give me an overall charge of negative 2? Well, a negative 8 plus 6 gives you negative 2.